This seems to be a new feature with Zoom. When I record it, announces this is being recorded. Okay, so let us begin first with 3 bows to the Buddha. 1, 2, 3. And this is the class of June 5th, 2021. And we'll start with salutation to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so today I'm going to be trying to cover a lot of material today by moving quickly through a lot of short suttas which don't need much explanation. And then when we come across suttas that need a little explanation, then we'll pause and elaborate upon them. And so now we're still in the Anguttara Nikaya Book of Fours, and we come to a group of suttas which are almost identical. The only term that's different is the different synonyms for light. So we have 4 splendors in the world: the splendor of the moon, the splendor of the sun, the splendor of fire. So those are physical types of splendor, and then the splendor of wisdom. And of the 4 splendors, the splendor of wisdom is foremost. Yeah, so the Pali word is it's actually a bit difficult to translate these suttas because all of the words that are used pretty much signify light. So we have the first one is Abha, then Pabba, third is Aloka, fourth Obasa, fifth is Pajota. So first we have, I translated splendor, then radiance, then light, then luster. Then looking for still another word, had to come up with luminary. So in each case, the 4 types of light are the same, and the moon, the sun, fire. Now today we have many other sources of light: spotlights, searchlights, neon lights, electric lights. But of all of the types of lights, the light of wisdom is foremost. And it's said that the reason why wisdom is compared to a light is that the function of wisdom is to illuminate the true nature of dharmas, of phenomena. And the opposite of wisdom, the word that's used as sort of the synonym or the symbol for ignorance, is darkness. So the Buddha says that all living beings, all unenlightened living beings, are living sort of enveloped in darkness. And then when wisdom arises, it is like a light that dispels the darkness of ignorance and illuminates the true nature of things. In fact, there's a very nice sutta in the Iti Vuttaka. Let me quickly get it up. Anyway, it's a little difficult to find just by searching quickly for it. But the sutta speaks about the arhats in the world as being like lights. Yeah, I should have gotten this in advance. I just thought of it. But there's a word that's used to describe the Buddha himself is tamonudo, one who dispels darkness. So when we make in the classical Sri Lankan verse for making the light offering, the offering of a lamp, Ganasara patitena dipena tamatangsina tiloka dipang sampudang pujayami tamonudang. So Ganasara patitena. So this light which burns by oil dispels the which dispels the dark which dispels darkness. I offer this to Tiloka Dipang, to the light of the three worlds, the Buddha who is Tamonudam, the dispeller of darkness. This is an interesting sutta, short but interesting. Here the Buddha speaks of 4 times. Here the word is kala. Let's get the Pali. Yeah, so there's 4 kinds of times. So there's a time for listening to the Dhamma, that's Dhamma Savanam. Then there is a time for discussing the Dhamma, that's Dhamma Sakacha. Then there's a time, I think the Burmese reading is not correct. Should take the other readings. A time for samatha. That's a time for tranquility meditation. And a time for insight. That's for vipassana, for developing vipassana. And so we could say that there's a kind of sequence involved here. So first, in order to progress in the Dhamma, we have to listen to the Dhamma, to hear the Dhamma. And we have to remember also that in the Buddha's time, texts were not written down. There was no writing of sacred scriptures, no printed books. So in order to learn the Dhamma, you have to go to the teacher in order to listen to an exposition of the Dhamma, to listen to the explanations, analysis of the teaching. But then, in order to clarify one's understanding, then one has to discuss the Dhamma. So this is Dhamma Sakacha. So this could involve asking questions of the teacher, bringing up, even challenging the teacher, even debating points on the Dhamma, or at least expressing one's own point of view and getting feedback for others. Because we could say that the task of listening to the Dhamma and of discussing the Dhamma is to sharpen and expand one's understanding. That is to gain right view and to expand the range of right view so that it encompasses more and more principles. And sometimes what happens, this happens often nowadays with people who just read Buddhist books on their own, they get a particular point of view, and then they come to the conclusion, my point of view is right, other points of view are wrong, and then they hold somewhat dogmatically and tenaciously to that point of view. So one of the benefits of discussing the Dhamma is that it helps to get feedback on your own points of view and to listen to other interpretations, other types of understanding. And if one has a soft and flexible mind, then one would be willing to at least to open your mind to try to understand other perspectives, other points of view. And in that way, even if your point of view is correct, but it might be just a very particular and specific understanding, whereas when you hear other points of view, then you can expand and get a more comprehensive understanding. One beautiful example of this occurs in the Majjhima Nikaya. It's Sutta number 32. It's a discourse that takes place in the Gosinga forest of sala trees. It is on a full moon night. And in ancient India, on a full moon night, there was no smog, no clouds. Probably it would have been not in the rainy season, but in the dry season, where the sky is very clear. And on a full moon night, the moon just comes flooding the forest. Everything is so bright. And on this night, the monks get together, and one of them, I think it's Sariputta, he raises the question. First, he points out that this is a very beautiful night. It's almost like we're in a heavenly world. And there's the fragrance of the sal trees, perfume of the sal trees blowing through the forest. And we're all gathered here in this little enclave in the forest. Then he asks the monks, what is the kind of monk that could illuminate this sal tree forest? And then each of the monks explains their own point of view, what they take to be the ideal monk. For example, when Venerable Ananda speaks, he takes the ideal monk, one who has extensively learned the Dhamma and has retained it in mind and is able to expound it in beautiful ways from the beginning, the middle, and the end. When the Venerable Mahakassapa, when it's his turn to speak, he says that it's a monk who is firmly established in the ascetic practices and teaches other the ascetic practices. When Anuruddha, when his turn comes to speak, he extols the monk who has the divine eye, who can see many distant world systems. I think when Upali speaks, Upali, the specialist in the Vinaya, extols the monk who is well established in the Vinaya. And Moggallana speaks about a monk who is skilled in Dhamma discussion, a little bit out of place because Moggallana's specialization is the psychic powers. And when Sariputta's turn comes to speak, he extols the monk who could enter into any meditative absorption that he wants to. And so they all present their own image, their own picture of the ideal monk. And then they say, let us go to the exalted one, the Buddha, and we'll summarize our discussion for him and see which one the Buddha will extol as the foremost monk. And so they go to the Buddha. Sariputta gives the summary of the discussion to the Buddha. Then the Buddha says that you have all spoken well, and you've all spoken according to your own personal ideal, your own sort of intuitive concept of the ideal monk. But let me tell you my conception of the ideal monk. And then the Buddha says, this is the one who sits down, crosses his legs, and makes the determination, let the blood and flesh of my body dry up until only skin and bones remain, but I will not break the sitting posture until my mind is liberated from the defilements. Yeah, so anyway, this shows some of the value of discussing the Dhamma, that you get to understand things from different points of view. Okay, so there's a time for each. Then there's a time for serenity and a time for insight. So these are the two main, two main branches of meditation, or the two types of skills that are to be cultivated through meditation practice. So the practice of what is called, here translated, serenity or samatha, is the practice of collecting the mind, settling the mind, focusing the mind, and unifying the mind in order to make the mind calm, sharp, clear, and well-focused, attentive, able to home in on whatever object one focuses on. So that is the kind of preliminary skill. And for some meditative systems, pre-Buddhist meditative systems, serenity or samadhi was taken as the goal in itself, the final aim of the practice. But for the Buddha, the purpose of collecting and concentrating the mind is to use the concentrated mind to investigate and examine the nature of bodily and mental phenomena. And that investigation, that examination, is what takes place in the development of vipassana or insight. So in this case, to develop insight, one turns that focused mind on the phenomena comprised in the five aggregates, examining first bodily form, then feeling, perception, then mental activities, the sankharas, and then consciousness itself, in order to see them by way of the three characteristics: anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self. And then the next sutta, number 147, begins in the same way as 146, but then it sort of draws the necessary conclusion that these four times, rightly developed and rightly coordinated, gradually culminate in the destruction of the taints. So the reason why one devotes time to these four activities is to bring them together, to unify them, to coordinate them, so that they collaborate and work together to bring about the elimination, the destruction of the asavas. The key word here is asavas. And then the destruction of the asavas is asava kaya. And then the text illustrates this with a nice simile. So just as when it is raining, then the rain pours down in thick drops on a mountaintop. Then the water flows down along the slope until it fills the cleft, the gullies, and the creeks. When these are full, they fill up the pools. When the pools are full, then the water flows down from the pools and fills up the lakes. When the lakes, I guess these are mountainside lakes, become full, then sort of openings occur, and then they flow down in streams. And when the streams converge, they turn into rivers. And then the rivers, when they become full, they flow down to the great ocean. And so in the same way, these four times, or rather we could say the four activities taken during these four times, When they're properly developed and unified, when they collaborate, then they gradually culminate in asavakaya, the destruction of the taints. We'll see if there are some more interesting suttas, then we could take questions. Okay, conduct. Yeah, this is just very basic because this is the book of four, so it's bringing all types of fours together. So we have the four kinds of verbal misconduct, false speech or lying, divisive speech, speech that creates conflicts and friction between people who are otherwise living in unity, harsh speech or angry speech, and gossip or idle chatter. So the four kinds of verbal misconduct, four kinds of good conduct: speaking the truth, speaking in ways that bring harmony and unity between people, speaking gently, and speaking judiciously, speaking at the right time. Then the four kinds of cores. The key word here in Pali is sara. Yeah, so the word, you can see the word common to all of these compounds is sara, which originally the word sara means the heartwood of a tree. So you cut through the bark, then you cut through the softwood, then you come to the core or the heartwood of the tree. And so the Buddha, that, or the maybe Indian languages, even before the Buddha, took that word sara to indicate that which is the essence of something, the core of something. So we could say that these are the core of a rightly lived life, a life dedicated to the Dharma, the practice of the basis of sila or virtuous conduct. Then on the basis of virtuous conduct, one trains the mind to develop samadhi, concentration. Then based on concentration, one develops panya or wisdom. And then through wisdom, one eradicates the defilements, eliminates the asavas or the taints, and then gains vimukti, liberation. So actually, one might even say that sort of changing the formulation of the sutta, that for each of these four items, the one that follows it is its core. So we could say that concentration is the core of sila, of virtuous behavior, because virtuous behavior serves as the foundation for concentration. So in the Buddhist training, one observes the silas, the rules of conduct, as a way of developing the mind in order to achieve samadhi or concentration. And one develops concentration, one practices samadhi in order to develop wisdom. So we could say wisdom is the core of concentration. So on this image, maybe we could say that samadhi is like the softwood and panya or wisdom is like the hardwood. So you cut through concentration in order to get to wisdom. But then we could say that the mutti or liberation is the core of wisdom. So even though wisdom is valuable in itself, but the purpose of developing panya in the Buddhist training is to eradicate the defilements and thereby gain liberation. So liberation is the core of wisdom. We can even say that liberation is the core of the three trainings. So the three trainings are undertaken in order to gain vimutti, liberation. Yeah, in fact, there's a sutta, now I remember this, in the Majjhima Nikaya. Chulasaropama Sutta. Yeah, here the Buddha speaks about a monk who goes forth into homelessness, seeking to gain liberation from suffering. Okay, then first he gains honor, praise, and offerings, and then he becomes satisfied with that and doesn't go further. And then he praises himself and denigrates others. Then we have a monk, the next level, the monk who observes the precepts and thinks that is the essence. And then he remains satisfied with observing the precepts and doesn't go further. And then the Buddha says, like, this is similar to a person who has entered the forest seeking sara, seeking heartwood, but he takes away, he sees a tree and he cuts away the branches and the foliage, thinking that he's gotten heartwood, and he remains satisfied with that. Okay, next we have a monk who attains samadhi, and then he becomes satisfied with that, thinking I've gained the goal of the spiritual life. And the Buddha compares him to a person who's gone searching for heartwood, and he cuts away the branches and the foliage. He doesn't take that, but he takes away the softwood and the bark, thinking that is heartwood. He's satisfied with that. Then we have a monk who goes forth into homelessness, seeking to put an end to suffering. He gains the divine eye. Yeah, he gains the divine eye, the spiritual eye, and then he becomes satisfied with that and doesn't go further. So this is like the monk who, or the person who goes into the forest and takes the softwood and remains satisfied with that, but doesn't go on to take the heartwood. And finally, the Buddha speaks about the monk who goes forth into homelessness and gains the final liberation. And he says, this is like the person who has gone into the forest seeking heartwood. He sees the tree, cuts down the tree, removes the branches, removes the bark, removes the softwood, and removes the heartwood, and takes that away to use for his purposes. And then the Buddha concludes and he says, this is the purpose, the aim of the spiritual life. This is the sara. This is the heartwood. This is the pariyosana. This is the goal or the culmination. That is the unshakable liberation of mind. So that is Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 32. So that is heartwood. Okay, maybe we could see if we have any questions at this point. Yeah, if you want to ask questions, I think you know that you use in the participants box, you would use at the foot of the participants box, the little symbol for the raised hand. Okay, I see a few questions. First is Chung.
Good morning, Bhante.
Morning.
Hi. Just now, Bhante was talking about the suttas on light, and I wonder whether the sutta that Bhante was looking for in Iti Uttaka happens to be Sila Sampanna Sutta.
Let us see.
That's the 104th sutta.
Let me just do a quick search.
Chatuka.
Oh, very good. Yeah, exactly, exactly. So here the Buddha speaks about, he speaks about those monks who possess sila, who possess samadhi, who possess panya, or wisdom, who possess vimutti, liberation, and who possess the vimutti jnana dasana, the knowledge and vision of liberation, and who are also teachers, guides, instructors, and so on. So the Buddha says, even seeing those monks is a great benefit, even listening to them, even approaching them and so forth is of great benefit. And why is that? And then the Buddha says, such monks are called teachers, caravan leaders, removers of dust, dispellers of darkness, makers of light, makers of radiance, makers of luminosity, torchbearers, makers of, another word for light. In English, we run out of words for light, makers of glory, and so on. Yeah, so that's very, very good. Thank you so much. It's Iti Uttaka Sutta 104. I was thinking it was in the 3s, but it's in the 4s. Okay, so next is Ali.
Yes, thank you, Bhante. Yeah, I don't know very much about the suttas, and I'm wondering if the Four Noble Truths are also in the Book of Force, and if not, where can I see it? Thank you.
Yeah, it's an important question because there are a number of standard items that form numerical sets that have a lot of suttas devoted to them. So those suttas and those topics that have a lot of suttas devoted to them come in the Sanguttara Nikaya, which I translated as the connected discourses of the Buddha, because the connected discourses centers around each chapter. Each major chapter centers around a particular doctrinal topic. So the Four Noble Truths is, of course, a major doctrinal topic. And so there are many, many suttas devoted to the Four Noble Truths. And so those come in the Sanguttara Nikaya. Similarly, the suttas on the Noble Eightfold Path, you don't find in Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Eights, but in the Sanguttara Nikaya, in the chapter on the path.
Thank you.
I think if you want like a broad overview of the Pali Canon, if you look on Google, search through Google, you can find there was a little book called An Analysis of the Pali Canon, which will, it takes each of the Nikayas and then it shows the chapters in those Nikayas and the suttas that are included in those chapters. So that way you get a broad overview of the canon.
Yes, but these are on the connected discourses, you said, yes.
Yeah, Sanguttara Nikaya.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other questions, so maybe we could move on. Okay, the next couple of suttas actually bring up an interesting matter related to this question that Ali just asked. So here we have a little puzzling. The sutta speaks about 4 faculties. So what are the 4 faculties? The faculty of faith, the faculty of energy, the faculty of mindfulness, and the faculty of concentration. Then the next sutta speaks about 4 powers: the power of faith, the power of energy, the power of mindfulness, and the power of concentration. So if you see these 4 faculties and 4 powers, and you're familiar with the Dharma, what do you immediately think?
Five hours.
What is that?
Oh, Eightfold Path.
No,
5 faculties.
I heard somebody say it.
Where's wisdom?
Enlightenment.
5 powers.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, there's 5.
Yeah, so
Five.
yeah, usually we find 5 faculties and 5 powers. So where are the 5 faculties and 5 powers to be found? So the faculties and powers form a standard doctrinal set, and there are many suttas devoted to the 5 faculties, or different groups of 5 faculties. And so those are also to be found in the Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 48, the chapter on the faculties, and then the powers might be chapter 49 or 52. I don't remember exactly. Yeah, so why are just 4 of those faculties and 4 of those powers taken out and put into a separate set in the Anguttara Nikaya? Anybody have any idea? Okay, I don't myself. I don't have any idea. It seems, sometimes I think that the compilers had to fill up a chapter with 10 suttas. And so they just out of random took material and put it in, even though the material doesn't fit so well into that chapter. Okay, now we come to a different group of 4 powers. Here we have the power of wisdom. The power of wisdom, the power of energy, the power of blamelessness, and the power of attracting and sustaining others. Let's just see what these amount to in Pali. Yeah, it seems 4 items that probably elsewhere are referred to as powers are here brought together, even though between all of them, there's not such a clear connection. We could say that there's a connection between sati, the power of sati or mindfulness, and samadhi bala, the power of samadhi. And these 2 are found in the standard list of the 5 powers. So the power of faith, power of energy, power of mindfulness, power of concentration, power of wisdom. But then we have anavajja bala, the power of blamelessness, which would refer to, it seems, to sila, to conduct. So when one looks at one's conduct and one sees that one's conduct by way of body, speech, and thought is blameless, that gives a particular kind of power. And then the fourth power is, and it's referring to a significant word called Sangraha, which takes on the meaning elsewhere, or is explicated elsewhere, as the power of attracting other people and sort of bringing them together to form a group. It's a word very difficult to find a single adequate translation for it in English. I believe it was earlier in the Anguttara Nikaya Book of Fours, the text spoke about 4 kinds of Sangraha, what's called Sangraha Vatu. Anybody remember what they are?
Generosity,
Okay, generosity or giving is one.
endearing speech,
Right, exactly. The next,
beneficial conduct,
yeah, very good. So this would be conduct that is beneficial to others. Apart from giving, it would be like lending a helping hand, maybe giving wise advice and guidance, helping others when they're in trouble. And then the fourth one,
impartiality,
yeah, impartiality. And sometimes maybe can explain as treating others as equal to oneself. Okay, so these become the 4 means of, sometimes I've seen it translated, maybe I've used this translation myself, the 4 means of gathering a retinue, of gathering a group of followers. So if you want to gather people to sort of befriend people and make them win their devotion towards oneself, one gives a gift. And in that way, somebody, especially if you give something that they really need, or you give them a gift on their birthday or on some other significant occasion, so then they come to appreciate you for the gift and they become devoted to you. And then you speak to them politely and nicely. When praise is due, you give them some praise. When they're in trouble, you might speak in ways that lift up their spirits. If they're having a hard time, you might give them some encouragement. So you speak in ways that win their affection. I already mentioned some examples of beneficial conduct. And then impartiality. You treat others, you don't put yourself in a privileged position above others and helping them as though they're below you, but you treat them as being equal to yourself. And in that way, you win their loyalty and affection. And these 4 bases of gaining the retinue, they're just mentioned several places in the Pali Suttas, but later in the Mahayana Suttas, they come to play a more significant role because it's one of the sort of tasks of the Bodhisattva who's aspiring to Buddhahood. You see, a Buddha has a large retinue of monastic disciples and lay followers. And so it's said that the way the Buddha has acquired such a large retinue of followers is in many, many past lives, when he was on the Bodhisattva path, he practiced the 4 Sangraha, the four means of winning, of gaining a retinue. And so I guess this is called a power, because when you practice these four Sangraha, then it attracts others to oneself, and you sustain their loyalty and affection. Okay, so these are the four powers. Again, in this sutta, it seems to be almost like a random set of powers just brought together because they all share this word bala, power or strength. Another four powers. Oh, I see. I think I jumped too quickly. Yeah, so the first should be the power of wisdom. And then in the next sutta, wisdom is replaced by mindfulness. Oh, here we have wisdom, energy, then blamelessness, and Sangraha bala. The next sutta, the power of mindfulness and concentration, and the other two. You could join them together, then you get 7 powers. Then we have the power of reflection and the power of development. I think this is an important distinction here between reflection and development. Let's see the Pali. Yeah, you don't get the full significance of what is intended from the English translation, so it needs a little explanation. Okay, so we have Patisankhana bala, and it's contrasted with Bhavana bala. So these two actually form a pair, which a pair that are contrasted, that are played off against each other. So Patisankhana bala, the power of reflection. So this is the use of sort of discursive thinking as a way to overcome a defilement. So let us say sensual lust arises in the mind, say of a monk, and he wants to overcome that sensual lust, but he's not so strongly developed in Samadhi meditation. So in this case, the monk might use the reflection as a means of overcoming that sensual lust. So he might reflect, okay, I have gone forth into homelessness in order to reach the end of dukkha. If I allow my mind to be overcome by sensual lust and sort of indulge it and enjoy it and flow with that sensual lust, it will become stronger. Then I might be tempted to give up my monastic life and return to the lay life in order to indulge sensual lust. And then he might reflect on some of the arguments that we find in the suttas, that sensual pleasures give little happiness, little satisfaction. When you get attached to them, they sort of bog you down in sensuality, and you might even be tempted to transgress the moral precepts in order to enjoy sensual pleasures and so on. And in this way, by reflecting, by discursive thinking, by examining the drawbacks in sensual lust and the benefits in renunciation, one is able, at least temporarily, to dispel the sensual lust. Whereas Bhavana bala is the power of development. So in this case, we might take a practitioner who has developed the jhanas, who is skilled in the jhanas. And so if the person is not practicing diligently, maybe some sensual thoughts of sensual lust arise in the mind. And maybe they start to pop up every now and then coming into the mind. And so the practitioner recognizes this and then thinks, I'm being heedless and careless because I've been neglecting my practice of jhana. And because of this, these sensual thoughts are coming into the mind. But if I enter into the jhana, then I can gain that joy and bliss apart from sensuality. And that will act as the antidote to the sensual lust. And so then the practitioner starts again reviving their practice of the jhanas, going into the jhana, remaining for some time in the jhana. And then when emerging, then there's that power of the jhana attainment continues, even when coming back to ordinary consciousness. And that power of the samadhi helps to keep the sensual lust under the cover, under the blanket. But even samadhi is not yet enough to eradicate the lust. For this, one has to go to the next stage of development, which will be panya bhavana, the development of wisdom. So in this case, one develops the wisdom, the insight, penetrating insight into impermanent, unsatisfactory, and selfless nature of phenomena. And then if one reaches the stage of non-returner, then sensual lust will be cut off permanently, forever. Similarly, we could take the case of thoughts of anger or irritation or ill will. So for a practitioner who's not well, strongly developed in meditation, maybe thoughts of ill will arise or anger. So in this case, the practitioner will use the power of reflection. So if thoughts of anger and ill will arise, then I reflect that these thoughts of ill will are disturbing to the mind. They're a distraction. They're oppressive. They create so much turmoil in my own life. If I let them continue, they might motivate some kind of harmful and destructive behavior. And so let me use the power of energy, of virya, to dispel those thoughts of anger. And then through the determined effort, one removes the thoughts of anger and develops patience. Okay, in the case of the power of bhavana, the power of development, we might have the practitioner who's previously, we could say, developed the meditation of loving kindness. But now in everyday life, somebody is creating some disturbance to them, some annoyance. And so thoughts of ill will start to arise towards the other person. But now the meditator recognizes this and realizes now thoughts of ill will and resentment have arisen towards that other person. Let me overcome those thoughts of ill will through the power of loving kindness. And so then they start to develop the thought of loving kindness, maybe starting with friendly people, then with neutral people. Then they will come to the annoying and disturbing person. And by the power of development, they're able to send the loving kindness to the hostile, annoying person. And in this way, overcome the anger and resentment in their mind towards that person. And then if they go further, they can develop their wisdom to the point of the stage of non-return, where they eradicate, permanently cut off the disposition towards ill will, and they're forever free of ill will. Okay, so this is the distinction. The power of reflection is the use of discursive thinking, reflection, to uncover the drawbacks, the dangers, the disadvantages in different defilements and the benefits in overcoming them. Whereas the power of development is developing one's samadhi and one's insight to the point that these defilements are first suspended or suppressed and then eradicated through wisdom. Okay, let's take the next sutta, then we could take some questions. Yeah, this is the completely different theme now. These are the 4 divisions of an Aeon. And this brings us to the Buddha's cosmology. So the word that we translate as Aeon in Pali is Kalpa, and maybe we know the Sanskrit form better, the word Kalpa. And this is the major unit that Buddhist texts use for measuring cosmic time. So the Kalpa, I find that the Sanskrit term runs off my lips more easily than the Pali term. The Kalpa extends from we have the very beginning of a Kalpa, which is the beginning of the stage of the cosmic development, the cosmic unfoldment, where the universe, or a particular portion of the universe, particular world system, starts to develop. And it goes through a stage of development, gradual development over time, until it reaches the fullness of development. I like to start from the Aeon of evolution. This is the stage where the cosmos, where the world system starts to develop, starts to unfold, starts to evolve. And so it goes through the stage of gradual development, gradual evolution, until it reaches a stage of maximum evolution. And then it remains in that stage for a certain period of time. And then it starts to collapse or to dissolve. So it may be to collapse upon itself, to dissolve upon itself, to undergo a gradual destruction. So that's the stage of beginning dissolution. And then once it reaches the stage of maximum destruction, maximum dissolution, then it remains in that stage of dissolution for a certain period of time, after which some disturbance occurs. And then again, it starts to evolve or to unfold till it reaches the stage of maximum development, remains in that stage for a certain period of time. Then it starts to collapse upon itself, to dissolve. Then it reaches a stage of maximum dilution, and then again starts to develop, to unfold. And so those are the 4 primary divisions of an Aeon. And the Buddha says for each of these stages that the length, the duration of that period cannot be calculated, cannot be counted as so many years, hundreds of years, thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. And then there's a famous sutta in which the Buddha is asked about the duration of the Kalpa, the duration of the Aeon. Yeah, I give the reference here. You find these suttas in the Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 15. Yeah, so in one of these suttas, a monk comes to the Buddha and says, "Can you tell me, Venerable, what is the duration of an aeon, of a kalpa? And the Buddha says the duration of the kalpa cannot be, you cannot give a number, so many years, hundreds of years, so many hundreds of thousands of years. And then the monk says, can you give a simile? Okay, in one sutta, the Buddha gives a simile. So he says, imagine that there is a mountain of solid granite. It's a yojana. A yojana is about 6 miles, 6 miles high, 6 miles across, solid granite. Then once every 100 years, a man comes with a cloth of, comes with a piece of Benares cloth. It's a very, very fine cloth, very fine material. And he just rubs the mountain one time, then goes off. Then 100 years later, another man comes with a piece of Benares cloth and strokes the mountain one time. And this goes on over and over. Then the Buddha says, in this way, that mountain would be worn away, would completely disappear, completely turn to particles of dust, but still the Aeon would not yet be finished. So that's one simile. So I don't know if that's a good simile, because it seems to me in this way that the mountain of solid granite would never be worn away. Just the piece of cloth could not wear away enough particles of the mountain for the mountain ever to disappear. Okay, the other simile, Buddha says, imagine that there is a city, I think, a yojana, that's again 6 miles, 6 miles wide, so it's a square city, 6 miles in each direction, full of mustard seeds or sesame seeds. And every 100 years, a man would come and would take away one mustard seed or sesame seed. More quickly, the Buddha says, would all of the sesame seeds in that city be removed, but the Aeon would not yet come to an end. Okay, then there's another sutta with a simile. I think it's a Brahmin comes to the Buddha and says, throughout this samsara, how many aeons, how many kalpas have elapsed? Again, the Buddha says it's not possible to give a definitive number as to how many kalpas have passed. Then the Brahmin says, can you give a simile? And the Buddha says, bring to mind the grains of sand along the bank of the river Ganges. And the river Ganges extends from, I think it's someplace high up in the Himalayan mountains. It begins and it ends at what is now present-day Calcutta. So imagine all of those grains of sand. And he says the number of aeons that have arisen and passed away are more numerous than those grains of sand of the river Ganges. So actually, the Buddha says that samsara is without discoverable beginning, without any first point in time. So naturally, the number of kalpas that have come and gone will have to be more numerous than the sands of the Ganges. Because the sands of the Ganges are still, even as numerous as they are, billions and billions, but it's still a finite number. But in infinite time, infinite aeons have arisen and vanished. And each of those aeons goes through these, or the world system in each of these aeons goes through these 4 stages of beginning to evolve, the gradual evolution, the stage of full evolution, maximum evolution, the stage of gradual dissolution, and the stage of complete dissolution. Interesting question. In the stage of complete dissolution, what happens to the mind streams of all of the beings who have been living in the world system at that time? Because at that time, the world system becomes completely unlivable, unsustainable for living beings. What's said in some suttas, yes, the suttas say that the world is dissolved or destroyed in three ways: by water, fire, and wind. When the world is destroyed by fire, then it said it's consumed up to the devas of streaming radiance. So this is called the Abhasara Deva Loka. Then it said that what happens when the world is about to be destroyed by fire, then all of the beings develop the jhana up to the level of the second jhana, and then they're reborn among the devas of streaming radiance. And similarly with the other types of destruction. But this seems a bit not so convincing to me, because, okay, say the world is to be destroyed by fire. So maybe human beings, let us suppose all human beings get filled with alarm. The world is going to be destroyed. The world is going to be destroyed. How are we going to escape that destruction? Then they develop jhana up to the second jhana and get reborn among the devas of streaming radiance. But what happens to the deer? Do they develop jhana to the second? Do they develop the second jhana? What happens to the birds? What happens to the foxes and the bears and the cows and the horses and the pigs and the dogs and the cats? Do they develop jhana to the level of the second jhana? So what happens to their consciousness in the period of dissolution? Wow, I don't know. Anyway, let's see, do we have any questions? Again, please use your hand symbol to ask questions. Okay, Marcel.
Thank you, Bhante. So I have a question. When Bhante mentioned about the Buddha mentioned there is no discoverable beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm wondering whether the Buddha reached that conclusion is because the Buddha looked through his past life and then traced back all the way until the point where the Buddha stopped, until the Buddha maybe say like something like, okay, this is far enough. I would not trace further until the Buddha would not trace further. So that's why the Buddha said no discoverable beginning. So it seems to me it is inconclusive that whether there is a point of beginning or not.
Yeah, that's a good point. The Pali word is actually, that's translated, I translate anamataga. So we have, the text says, anamatago ayang samsaru. So this samsara, the cycle of rebirths, and then this word is very problematic, and nobody really knows exactly what it means. The commentary gives a rather convoluted explanation. When it was, the early texts were transcribed into or put into Sanskrit, the different Sanskrit versions use different Sanskrit terms to render this word. So nobody knows exactly the meaning of this word. So I've tried to speculate that it must mean that the beginning cannot be discovered, cannot be found. But the point that you bring up is a good point, that the only way you could determine that samsara is without any first point at all would be to go back through infinite time. But there's no way to get back to infinite time, to go back through the infinite past, since it would take infinite time in the present to cover infinite time in the past. But the Buddha says no first point of ignorance can be found before which you can say, at this point, ignorance arose and didn't arise before that. So my understanding would be that what the Buddha discovered is the sequence of conditions that underlies samsara. And this is the sequence that begins with ignorance as the most fundamental condition. And then you take everything else that comes after ignorance, starting with the volitional formations, until you come to old age and death, jara marana. And so the most fundamental condition is ignorance, and ignorance arises on the basis of a sentient being with 5 aggregates. And so we have 5 aggregates, being with 5 aggregates. You don't have ignorance just arising in outer space, just on its own, but it occurs in a being with 5 aggregates. And why do these 5 aggregates arise? They arise on the basis of volitional activities or sankharas. So it's the sankharas that give rise to the 5 aggregates. And why do these sankharas occur?
Avijja.
Because of avijja. And why does avijja, how does avijja occur? It occurs on the basis of 5 aggregates, which are formed by the sankharas, which are formed by avijja. And so probably what the Buddha saw is that there's this infinite regression of conditions underlying samsara. So that would be my understanding. Okay, we move to the next question. Let's take some other, because Ali already asked some questions, so let's give some other people. So Samantha.
Thank you, Bhante. I was just wondering how this Darwin's theory of evolution, how, or if I can, how that fits in here, or is that a separate topic? Or
I'd say it's a separate topic. I have to say, there's nothing in the Buddhist text which indicate we have to be completely honest intellectually. So I've seen some people say the Buddha anticipated Darwin's theory of evolution. No, there's no indication in the Buddhist texts of forecasting of Darwin's theory of evolution. But what we would say is that biological evolution would take place during the stage of cosmic evolution. There is a sort of theory of evolution, which seems a little more highly mythical. In the Digha Nikaya, it's the Aganya Sutta, the Sutta on origins. I think it's Digha Nikaya Sutta number 29, the Aganya Sutta, which speaks about how beings descend when the cosmos is beginning to develop again. The beings from the plane of streaming radiance take rebirth back into the human realm, but they exist in a kind of highly spiritualized form as spiritual beings with bodies radiant with light. They don't have to eat solid foods since they subsist on joy. They can move wherever they want just through the power of thought, but then they gradually become more and more corrupted until we come to the society that we find in India at the time of the Buddha with its caste divisions and so
on. Thank you, Bhante. That's interesting. Yeah, because I always get confused, with how, this is Darwin's theory only about 200 odd years, and how that fits in with this cosmology aspect, which is about eons and eons. But yeah, and maybe Buddha's talking about all desires and craving, that sort of way of progression, isn't it? Yeah,
I take that progression in the Aganya Sutta to be symbolic, and almost a playful, eventually it turns into a kind of playful account of how the four castes arose as a kind of rejoinder to the Brahmins who held to the divine creation of the four castes.
Lovely. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, let us see any other. So, Chung, you had your hand up.
Good morning, Bhante. This is with regards to what Bhante mentioned about the dissolution of the cosmos. And how would the animals be reborn in the Brahma realms? I remember reading somewhere, but I can't remember where, that these animals would first be reborn in the Deva realms due to their past good karma. And then at the Deva realms, they would then develop jhana concentration.
Maybe there is such an explanation. I don't recall it offhand, but there might be some kind of explanation in the commentaries to deal with that point.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, I see a hand. It's reconnecting. Is there a question there?
Is it my hand, Bhante? Sorry.
Is your Zoom account named Reconnecting?
I don't know. Maybe the connection is not good.
I see. What is your name?
Chin.
Chin. Yeah, the name of the Zoom account is Reconnecting.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Maybe the connection is poor. Can I ask you something which I've been always wanting to ask? What happens to the Buddha? I mean, is he part of the beings?
Yeah, that's almost like a completely different question. Even when the Buddha passes away.
Yeah, what happens to the Buddha? I mean,
then all that's said is that he attains parinibbana. He passes into the ultimate nibbana. Yeah, but that becomes a big question. We just have to deal with questions that are relating to these suttas. Ravi, I see you've had your hand up.
Yes. Yes, Bhante. Ravi, thank you very much for taking the question. Bhante, I'm wondering whether this thing of the eons and the destruction of the world system, they are referring only to the material part, but whether the sort of there could be the sort of from a spiritual point of view, whether the energy systems could still be there and so-called streams of energy could also continue and again reform once the world is formed.
Yeah, actually, that would actually be my, excuse me, I'm losing my voice. My voice is going through the destruction of the Aeon.
Yeah, does it mean destruction of all energy altogether? Or just a...
No, but my hypothesis would be...
Because they talk of string theory and M theory and all sorts of things even today.
Yeah, yeah. My theory would be that when the Aeon is destroyed, of course, it's the world at this physical level, but the streams of consciousness that make up living beings, I would suppose, go into a kind of state of hibernation, so to speak.
Yeah, that's I was thinking
latent energy, waiting until the material cosmos starts to develop again. And as the material cosmos develops, then when the appropriate conditions emerge, then those streams of consciousness again take on embodiment.
Thank you, Bhante. This is exactly I was also trying to think whether that could be a possibility.
Yeah.
When we need to think of the world being destroyed or the universe being destroyed,
yeah.
We know that it's the material form that most people are referring to.
Yeah.
Not the
Yeah.
And thank you, Bhante, and Teruvan Sarnai. All the best, Bhante.
Yeah, I have a book, by the way, which I didn't get to finish. I just started it. It's by two contemporary cosmologists. One, I think, is at Princeton, one in Cambridge. It's called Endless Universe. And it develops in opposition to the theory that there was just a big bang and that the universe is going to evolve into a state of slow and steady, complete entropy where all energy wears down. And then there's nothing after that. But their theory is that through beginningless time, universes continue to emerge, to develop, to dissolve, followed by new universes, by still new universes, one after another. Okay, I just can take one more question. If it's a quick question, then we'll have to end. So this is Vinyu.
Yes, good morning, Bhante. It's actually regarding the earlier suttas that you mentioned about the hardwood.
Yeah.
The similes of the hardwood, sometimes Buddha actually used the similes of the banana trunk. So is it the essence is actually get to sunyata, right?
Yeah, that's in a different context. The simile of the banana tree or the plantain tree is used to illustrate the aggregate of volitional activities, the Sankhara Kanda, to show that it's, in a sense, empty or sunya, that there's no essence or no self underlying the volitional activities. So in that case, the five aggregates are held to be sunya or empty without any substantial core. But the Buddha uses the simile of heartwood in the other sense to show what is the essence in the sense of the ultimate goal of the spiritual life. In that sense, you could say the ultimate goal is vimutti, liberation.
Right, okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll have to end now for the day. And so we'll do the sharing of the merits. So I'll just recite the verse quickly. So this is sharing the merits of our Dhamma discussion, Dhamma exposition, our meditation, sharing the merits with the devas, the nagas, and with other beings. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang imina punyakamena. No, not that. Sorry. Bhavagupadaya vichihetato Tantare Satakayupapanna Rupya Rupicha Sanya Sanino Dukkha Pumuchantu Pusantu Nibbutine.
Sadhu, sadhu,
Sadhu,
sadhu,
sadhu. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay.
Thank you, Bhante.
Sadhu Bhante. Thank you,
Thank you very much,
Bhante.
Bhante.
Wait, I just wanted to mute everybody just to tell you that we will be having from Tuang Yen Monastery a retreat over the July 4th weekend. It'll be primarily a teaching retreat rather than a meditation retreat, but with periods of meditation on the first discourse of the Buddha. So a detailed investigation of the Dhammacakka Sutta, the Buddha's discourse on setting in motion the wheel of the Dhamma. So you could register for that retreat through the website of BAUS, of the Buddhist Association. Okay, so thank you all for joining us, and please.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu Bhante. Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Bhante.
Out to
Bhante.
Bhante. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Be well, Bhante. Be safe,
Okay.
Bhante.
Okay. Take care.
Sat, sat, sat.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to end now.